Okay, everyone, good morning. It is 10 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started with our webinar this morning. I just wanted to welcome you all. We have a whole bunch of people registered for our webinar. I think maybe this is our biggest one yet. So for some of you, you probably haven't joined us before, so just do a quick little housekeeping items here. Number one is that hopefully you can hear me just fine. It looks like I'm getting lots of messages saying that is good, so that's great. We do record every webinar that we do, so I typically get a question at some point saying, will the slides be sent out after the fact? And the answer to that question is actually no. We don't send the slides because we don't feel like the information on the slides makes any sense without my explanation to go with it. So ultimately, we actually will send out a video recording of this webinar with all of the information that I'm providing as part of it. And that will probably come out this afternoon, and it will get emailed to all of you. And that goes for any future webinars. So if for some reason you are really interested in a topic, and today was a good example, we had several emails this morning of people who want to come, but unfortunately weren't available at 10 o'clock this morning. And so just register for any webinar that you are interested in, and we will always send the recording out afterwards to everyone who is registered. So even if you're not able to attend live, make sure you send an email or get registered for the webinar, and then we will send you the email with the link after the fact, so you won't miss anything. Okay. So as you see on my homepage today, this is the first time we're really announcing this, so I'm pretty excited to let you know that we are hosting an event this year. We did one last year in the Durham region. This year we're going to focus a little on a slightly different group. We're going to be doing it as sort of more industrial focus in the GTA, and the event is going to be held in the summer in June, on the June 15th. Basically it's a mini conference. We're going to host a mini conference. We're going to have a couple days, or one day where there's 4 sessions. You choose an option in each of the time slots. You get to attend 2 sessions essentially. We have some great giveaways, takeaways. We're going to focus sort of specifically on industrial examples and content, and have some great conversation about best practices with the group that joins us. So if that is something that interests you, definitely stay tuned. I have a great offer today on the webinar, and we will have more on upcoming webinars from now until the time the event happens. So hang with us till the very end, and I'll have a special offer for you. All right, so let's talk about sit-stand workstations, is what you're really all here for today. This is a hot topic, obviously. As I said, we have more people registered for today's webinar than perhaps ever before, and pretty much every year we do a sit-stand workstation webinar of some kind, and it's always super popular. So we know this is a hot topic. We know people are still struggling with how to approach this, how to go about it, what do you choose, how do you do that. So I want to focus today on a few different elements. I want to talk a little bit about the idea of sitting versus standing, and how does that impact our body, so you understand essentially why sitting or standing is the ideal choice for your employees. Then we're going to talk a little bit about sit-stand options, because there are different ways to achieve this goal, and that is something that not everyone has a good grasp on yet, and it, more importantly, we don't all understand all the differences and nuances of the different options. So we're going to talk about that. Then we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about reducing the risk of sitting or standing. Ultimately, probably sitting, because that's sort of the focus, is that sitting's killing us, and it's the new smoking, and all the other catchphrases you've probably heard, right? So we're going to talk about what are the opportunities to reduce the risk without necessarily implementing a standing desk, because that isn't the reality for a lot of our clients, that they don't have enough money to be able to magically go out and outfit their workplace with 50 new sit-stand workstations. That carries a lot of financial investment, and so how do we reduce the risk without going in that direction? And is it really necessary, is sort of the 2 questions that we're going to talk about there. And I wanted to finish this webinar by talking a little bit about implementation strategies. So what I've done is compiled some different examples of how some of our clients have been using sit-stand to their advantage. And we're going to spend the last little bit of the webinar talking about these implementation strategies, and pros and cons kind of each one, what the approach has been, and how it's working for them. So we'll focus on some client-specific examples to wrap this up today. So hopefully you've heard likely all of these things, right? Sitting's the new smoking is probably the one that I think of the first whenever I hear that. Your health depends on sitting less. Sitting too long, making us sick. Sitting disease is a very common term we've heard. sitting is terrible is the message that we're getting from everywhere, right? That sitting is this awful thing that we should never do, right? That we should all be focused on standing more at our workstation. But the question really becomes is, has the media taken this too far the other way, right? Has they really put this hyper-focus on the idea that sitting is terrible for us, when really I think that the message here is really more about the idea that being sedentary, which includes sitting, is really harmful to our health. And that is true across every element of your life, right? Going home at the end of the day and you likely sit again, right? You likely sit down at some point, watch TV, maybe you're online, checking things out, you have dinner likely seated, right? So that also adds sitting time. So it's really more, for me, the message should be, has gotten twisted to be sitting, sort of sitting is terrible, but really it's about sedentary time that isn't great for us. We need to be more active as people in general, and now the question becomes, because this sort of sitting at work has become this hyper-focused thing, is how do we do that at work? How do we become more or less sedentary, more moving at work in order to combat some of these negative health effects? So firstly, what happens when we sit, right? So when we sit, when we're sedentary in general, our metabolic rate drops. That means we burn less calories. No surprise, we're not moving, you're not using your large muscle groups, so they disengage to some degree, right? And without moving them, then you aren't burning as many calories. Your blood flow decreases. Again, no surprise. Movement is what creates blood flow. So people who have diabetes, for example, will find that when they sit for hours or for even any kind of length of time, they likely start to experience some pooling and some swelling of the feet, right? Because our blood flow is decreasing and our body isn't able to pump that blood back up, in this case from our feet, in my example, right, to the rest of our body. So our blood flow does decrease because we're not moving, right? Good cholesterol levels decrease, right? So obviously we would like higher good cholesterol, lower bad cholesterol, but unfortunately we start to develop more bad cholesterol levels as we slowly sit longer. And your muscles disengage, they switch off, right? They no longer have any purpose or work to do, and so they disengage, which creates atrophy, which basically means that they start to shrink and get smaller. So all of these things are about movement, right? That because we're being sedentary and not moving, now all of these negative health effects start to occur, which is why the phrase sitting is the new smoking has been coined, right? Because obviously we don't want any of these things to happen. I would very much like to be burning more calories while I'm sitting. I would like my blood flow to be fabulous. I would like to be having better cholesterol, right? All of those things would be true if I was moving, not necessarily even standing, but if I was moving, right? So that's essentially what happens when we sit. But the question is, how bad is it? It is estimated that Canadians spend nearly 3/4 of their waking day seated. And think about that for your own life, right? I'm just quickly skimming some of the people that are online here with me, and I don't know all of you, but the ones I do know, I would say many of you are office workers. Fairly significant portion of your day is spent at the office. And so you likely sit, get up in the morning, you have breakfast, or you read the newspaper or online or whatever it is you do before you go to work. Then you sit in the car to go to work. Then you're at work for 8 hours a day. Then you sit in the car or on public transit or whatever that may be for you on the way home, right? And then maybe, so that, up until that point that you get home at the end of your workday, you have likely sat 80% or more of your day, right? And then you get home and maybe your evening is active. Maybe your evening includes, physical activity, going to the gym, skiing, whatever that might be for you, right? Maybe. But it might also, and oftentimes, it concludes with more sitting, right? That I know myself, if I've had a long day, I often come home, I sit with my family and we have dinner. And then once my 3-year-old, who is busy and keeps me going, right, once she goes to bed, then all of a sudden I am back to sitting. I tend to go back, and that's my time to veg out, right? I sit on the couch for those last hour or so before I go to bed. Or I sit and read or do something else that's equally sedentary and quiet. So it's no surprise that Canadians spend at least 3/4 of their waking day seated. So it's not just happening at work, it's happening across all parts of our life, and we need to keep that in mind, right? And if you're thinking about your employees, it's important to educate them on how, on the wellness components are a key piece here, right? It's not just about sitting at work, it's about sitting in general. So we need to be moving more throughout our entire life, not just at work. And we know, and there's lots of research out there to support as a result of those previous things we talked about on the slide before this, extended sitting is associated with higher rates of diabetes, heart disease, and obesity. No real surprise there. Heart disease, obesity, diabetes, poor blood flow, bad cholesterol, right? Muscles are not engaging, lower metabolic rate. All of these things are going to lead to these negative health effects. So we know it's not great for us, but is sitting and standing really the option? Is really doing sitting and standing at work really the option? So a lot of people come in when I see someone who has done who has had a doctor's note, for example. They'll come in and they'll tell me, my doctor says that I need to have a standing desk, right? So in theory, then standing seems like it's the right move, right? It's the right option. But reality says that's not truly the case, right? Standing is actually really hard on our body too. And so standing, although not as sedentary as sitting, can be somewhat sedentary. It's not movement necessarily, right? You do sway a little bit more, but essentially standing is pretty stationary. It can result in fatigue, absolutely. If you've ever stood for several hours at an event somewhere, manning a booth or beside a table or whatnot with no chairs, you will know what your legs and your body feels like at the end of the day. It is not easy. Oh, I have someone who said they've lost sound. Is that true for everyone, or is that just? Oh, sound is back on. Everybody else. So if anybody else has lost sound, please let me know. It looks like it's back on for this individual. So let's take a look back at this. Yeah, okay, other people are saying they're good. Great. Okay, so standing can result in fatigue and joint pain. We know how hard it can be to stand for hours on end. And then also it's harder to pump blood when you're standing because it has a greater distance to travel to some degree. It needs to experience blood pooling, and particularly in your lower limbs and in your feet. So really the message, I think, for everyone is that doing anything for 8 hours a day that is relatively stationary is going to be detrimental. So I don't really want you to stand for 8 hours a day either. In fact, I tell almost everyone that I see that has a doctor's note that says you should stand, that you probably don't want to do that either, right? Nobody wants to stand for 8 hours a day. What you really want is to figure out a way to build more mix into your day, more variety. You want to sit and stand and do a little bit of both. So that is where sit-stand workstations sort of were born. I'm gonna say use that description. They sort of were born out of this idea that we need to do both sitting and standing, right? They sound, interestingly enough, they sound like the silver bullet, right? They sound like the magic pill. Everybody can sit and stand, and that can or cannot be the case depending on how your employees use it, as well as how adjustable it is, how it's set up, whether it works for the employee in both sitting and standing positions, because it doesn't always, right? So we'll talk a little bit about the different options that are out there here in just a second. The good things about sitting and standing workstations is that typically they provide the option for posture variation, right? So even the act of sitting to standing or standing to sitting, that transition period, even that actual movement is going to combat some of the sedentary elements, right? So sitting to standing or standing to sitting is a movement. It does engage your muscles. It is going to improve blood flow for a short period of time. So even that action of going back and forth between the two is good, and it is going to start to combat some of the true sedentary elements because you are going to change posture throughout the day, which is good. Changes in muscle loading. It is a good thing for us to use it regularly throughout the day. Got a question here. Oh, good question. Somebody said, can you share the product name, manufacturer shown on this slide? That's a great question, Holland. I'm actually not 100% positive which product this is. I will have to look it up for you and get back. I have a whole bunch of different examples in the webinar, and I'm not sure which one this is. So I will make a quick note of that, and I will get back to you with the reference for sure. Okay, so let's have a look at sit-stand workstation. Oh, sorry, before that, postural variation. So we know that postural variation has a host of benefits. It improves blood circulation, avoids static postures. It also has those nice side benefits of improving productivity. If you've ever been sitting for hours on end, you probably know what you feel like at, let's say, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. You start your day at 8:30 or 9, maybe even 8, and by 12, 1 o'clock, chances are good you're pretty sluggish, right? You're getting tired, your brain's not working quite as well as it should, and there's lots of research out there to support that going for a short walk at that point will absolutely boost your energy levels, get you more motivated, more focused, so that you can actually ultimately improve your productivity if you can achieve all of those things, right? Just a little bit of energy and blood flow will help you here. So it's kind of amazing, actually, what postural variation has the same connected benefits, right? So we want to make sure that we're varying our postures as often as we can, which is what a sit-stand workstation allows us to do. So let's look at options then. Got my one slide ahead of myself. There are probably 3 primary ways to achieve sitting and standing at your workstation. Number 1 is sort of what's pictured here, which is a fully height adjustable desk. This is the same desk on the left and on the right. One is in the seated position, one is in your standing position, but it is essentially the same desk, right? So that is a fully height adjustable desk. One question we're getting a lot about is the actual desk add-ons or desk-mounted options, where you would take a standard desk that is in the seated position and mount something to it, which allows you to then raise your computer components, like your keyboard, your monitor, and your mouse, maybe even your telephone, depending on how things are mounted, up to your standing height. And then the third option is to do sort of a combination of the two, using a sorry, my brain's not working this morning, using a keyboard tray and a monitor arm in order to raise just your keyboard, mouse, and monitor up to the standing height. So there are some options on how we achieve that. But there are pros and cons for each of these options, and this is where a lot of our clients struggle, is they wade into this sit-stand world and then get lost thinking, I want to get the employee the best thing that they need. I want to get them the thing that they need so that they can actually be helped and benefited here, but I don't know which option is the best fit. And they all carry different price points. They all carry different features. What the heck am I looking for when I'm shopping? And unfortunately, it's not a one-size-fits-all for the most part. There are a few that probably are, but they tend to be the more expensive options, right? But a lot of things like desk mount options aren't necessarily one-size-fits-all. There are different features we're looking for different employees based on their height and their reaches, based on the type of work that they do. One option might be a better choice than another. There are a lot of variables that will tell you whether certain options are better than others. So that's part of where our challenges are coming from, is how do I pick the right thing for my employees? And if I want to implement this across the board, how do I make that a reality so that I'm accommodating as many people as possible? Okay, so let's have a quick peek at these different sit-stand options. So height adjustable desks are the first one I'm going to talk about. Oh, sorry about that. So height adjustable desks are the first ones we're going to talk about today, and these ones really are fully height adjustable work surfaces. Now they adjust in a whole bunch of different ways depending on the model. Probably the 3 most common are a pneumatic desk, right, electric, or they have a crank, right? Those are sort of the 3 main options. In particular, things to be mindful of when you're doing this. They have some great benefits. They probably are truly the one that is probably closest to one size fits all, because the whole workstation is going to adjust from a seated height to a standing height. So that's a great thing. They're typically pretty easy to use. There's no adjustments of your monitors or your keyboards independently. You can sort of get it all set up on the desktop and then just raise or lower your workstation as you need. And the great thing about this is that your whole workstation comes up. So if you are typing and you have some paperwork to do, and then you have a phone call to take, for example, all of those things can happen in both positions because your whole surface, your whole work surface, is up at your standing height or down at your sitting height. Right? So those can be really valuable tools. And there are some people I meet whose work really dictates that this is pretty much essential. It isn't always. In some cases, a desk mount option is a very suitable choice, but in generally speaking, the whole workstation adjusts up and down will work for most people's work methods and type of work that they do. Probably the biggest challenge here is that not all of these are created equal. So there's some things to be mindful of when you're making a selection here. Just because it goes from sitting to standing does not mean that it fits everyone. Right? Typically, the lower the price point, and this is a very generic statement, but typically the lower the price point, the less adjustability range it has, number one, or it might still have good adjustability, but the more manual the way it adjusts. So, for example, my husband actually works from home a few days a week, and we got him a sit-stand workstation because it was something that he was sort of excited about trying, and I thought, why not? Because, you know, this is what I do for a living, so let's see how somebody actually uses it. And one of our challenges when I was shopping around is I didn't want to spend a huge amount of money, and I was able to find some. He's quite tall. If you've met me, I'm quite short. I'm only 5'2", but ultimately he's quite a bit taller than me, and he is able to work. He obviously works on a much higher desk. He's a lot taller than I am. So it took some shopping around, but I was able to find one that adjusted from about 29 inches in height up to more than his standing height, which was no problem. But 29 inches is actually really quite high for a sit-stand desk. That's a pretty average desk height. 29 to 30 inches is a pretty average desk height. So what that means is that anybody like myself, any of your small females who already require a keyboard tray, wouldn't be able to adjust that desk low enough to sit comfortably and type on the desktop. So that means that you may save some money because your workstation doesn't go as low or as high perhaps as some, but to solve the ergonomic issue, you would essentially have to you'd have to add a keyboard tray or another surface to it in order to lower the keyboard down to the appropriate height for that individual. And now you're adding cost, which is what you were goal of saving in the first place, right? So not always a great option. The other element is the actual way it adjusts, right? Some of them have a manual crank, and you have to be thoughtful of that, right? Usability of a workstation, a manual crank is not a good option. Right? If you want, I've got some stats here in a few slides about the frequency of usage, and there's some research coming out of, I think it's Google that has been sort of following along with its employees using their sit-stand desks. But the usage element is actually pretty challenging. So you want to make it as easy to use as humanly possible. A crank is not easy to use. It takes time and energy. It can be awkward to access the crank, and so what you end up having is employees who stop using the sit-stand because they have to crank it up and down manually. And in particular, a lot of our employers that we're working with are using these not blanket giving everyone a sit-stand workstation. They are implementing sit-stand only for people who have very specific injuries or discomforts. And in that case, almost always, it's, let's say, if I'm saying that a sit-stand workstation is probably a good fit for someone based on their injury, likely we're talking about a back injury is probably the most common reason, or a lower body injury. You do not want someone with a back injury leaning over and cranking up or down their workstation every hour because you're likely to cause more problems than you are solving. So you need to think about sort of those factors. Is what is the range that it actually adjusts through? Is that sufficient for your employees? You don't want to have to add a keyboard tray because that adds several $100s to the cost, and that also, essentially eliminates the benefits of the sit-stand, or the benefits of the cost savings you might have gotten for that sit-stand. And you want to make sure that it's easy to adjust. Some of them even have a memory built in, so you'll have it like like your car might, like they have like a person 1, person 2, person 3 kind of thing. They will have like a ABC, and A is you preset A to be your sitting height, so that all you have to do is press A, and the whole desk will lower down to your seated height. Then you can hop in your chair, and there's no more fiddling. You don't have to worry about it. B would be your standing height, and then C could be something else if there's 3 options or whatnot. But there can even be some really neat features which makes the usability of this desk and the ease and the likelihood that it's going to be used more frequent, right? Will make it actually better. So somebody said the sit-stand station on the presentation is made by human scale. This one for sure here in the center is definitely made for human scale. The one on the previous slide that Holland was asking about is not a human scale product. Theirs is different. So I'll have to still have to look that one up. But thank you. All right. So that's option one, is a sort of fully height adjustable desk. The really main negative to this is the price point, right? So that's why a lot of people have gone to some version of a desk-mounted option, right? So I've got 4 examples here. There are lots of them on the market. Many companies have jumped on board with this, and they are all created differently, number one, and they all have some different features or unique things that make them good or bad options for certain staff. So typically what happens here is that your keyboard and your monitor adjust up and down, right? So the whole work surface doesn't come with you. So if you are someone that does a lot of paperwork or writes a lot of notes or is on the phone frequently, not all of these workstations will do what you need them to do. So that can be a challenge and maybe a reason why a sit-stand option is not a good choice. So task performed is a relevant component here and something you're going to want to evaluate when you decide if it's a good fit for someone. They typically carry a smaller price point than a height adjustable desk. So your height adjustable desks usually are over $1,000. That does change, depend a little bit, but usually over $1,000. And your desk mounted options, like the ones you see here, vary from about $400 or $500 upwards to about $900, give or take. They might be a little more than that, a little less, but let's say that's sort of your range. So there is often a little bit of cost savings to go to a desk mount option, and some of these are widely available at places that you might already get a discount at, for example. So Staples or Grand & Toy carries some of these models, and so you may actually be able to get a corporate discount or a cut on some of these to make them a little bit more price reasonable for you. So typically cost is a major motivator. The other huge benefit of this is that they can be portable. So I just saw a client the other day, and one of the employees I was seeing has some specific discomforts and a pre-existing injury, and as a doctor's note saying that they need a sit-stand. So after reviewing her workstation with her, I agreed that a sit-stand is a good fit based on what's going on with her body and her life right now. And so we recommended a sit-stand desk add-on, although that's not always the standard at that company. We did recommend a desk add-on, in particular because she is in a department that is not likely staying where it is, and so it makes the most sense to have something that's portable so that she can get it now, get the benefits of it immediately, and then take it with her when she moves to another workstation. So if you have sort of a work environment that is a little bit more transient in terms of the movement of workstations, you planning a retrofit, for example, or an update to your environment, you may find that a desk add-on is a good way to use that. Okay, so they all tend to be fair. Well, I shouldn't say that. They're not all. Many of them are fairly simple to use and adjust. Most of these models, the TaskMate, I haven't actually put my hands physically on, but the VariDesk, Ergotron, and Human Scale models, all are simple adjustments. You grab them, you stand them up, like you lift it up or lower it down to the height that you want it to go to, and then you stop and let go, and it holds its position as long as you've got all the tensions and adjustments and things set right, which is pretty easy to do at the beginning. So they're pretty simple to adjust, generally speaking. Again, you want to make sure that if you're going to invest this kind of money in something, that people are actually using it. And so one of the things you want to be mindful of is how does it adjust? The examples I have on here, I think the TaskMate as well, all adjust with relatively simple, just raise, stand up, stop, let go, and it holds its position. But there are some out there that require quite a few cranks. One of my colleagues saw one that had like 2 different cranks, and you had to put little feet in to keep it stable when it was standing. Like it had like little legs that went underneath it when it was standing. And his response was, it just seemed really flimsy, and it was really hard to adjust, and it wasn't intuitive. And there's a reason they probably chose that one, because it was most cost effective. But the challenge associated with that is that now this employee has to reach, turn a knob, make an adjustment, raise it up, hold it there while they crank it back so that it tightens itself back up and holds its position. And all of those things absolutely decrease the likelihood that they're going to use it. So if you're going to invest into a product that is over $500, and all of these are, then you are going to want to invest in one that is going to essentially give your employees the best opportunity to actually sit and stand, because you don't want to invest in something and then see somebody not using it because it's a pain to use or it's not easy to do, and I guarantee you that will be one of the major reasons that they stop doing it, right? It's because it becomes inconvenient to do so. Right, so be mindful of how they mount on. So I have the, I have a question here. It's about, do I have any advice for the electric full desk model? So you know what, Amanda, I'm going to hold that question till the end of the 3 different examples, and then I'll come back and answer questions about the 3 different options here momentarily. So I'm not going to ignore your question. I am coming back. Just hold tight for a few more minutes. So the one other major concern for me about these options is, so they've sort of highlighted the difference between them. So the human scale model and the VariDesk, the 2 on the right there, both of those workstations are designed so that when you lower down to seated height, they only go as low as the table. They basically, the surface for the keyboard sits on top of the table. There is no way for that keyboard to lower below the desk height. So anyone that you have already that already has a keyboard tray, for example, because it's like me, a 5'2" female working on a 30-inch desk is not going to fit, right, for the most part. So you are going to have a keyboard tray for them to achieve good ergonomic position. That is not always possible with these workstations, right? The human scale and the VariDesk, for example, both only go as low as the desk height. Whereas other models like the Ergotron, the Taskmate, the Winston, the what's the name of it, kangaroo, or some variation of the word kangaroo, it's escaping me right now. There are a whole bunch of them out there, but those ones all go below the desk height. So like you can see in the Ergotron, or in the Ergotron example, how they have a kind of a work surface in the center, that black flat surface, and then the keyboard actually comes down off of that on like a little L bracket, and that whole piece where the keyboard is and the mouse will actually drop below the desk height. So that means that someone who is shorter and needs to work below the 30-inch or 29-inch desk can achieve that with this model, whereas they can't with the VariDesk or the human scale. Right, so those are things you need to think about, and why not all workstations are created equal, right? What works for your 6'2" male or female may not work well for your 5'2" individual, because they need different things out of their workstation. And what works well for someone who performs administrative type tasks, right, like an executive assistant, versus what works well for your finance department is likely going to be different based on how much paperwork they reference, etc. Not all of these models work well with different accessories that need to go up to standing height. So there are things to think about when you're making a selection here. So if you have any questions about the height adjustable desk or the sit-stand add-ons like I've just talked about, or the next one I'm going to talk about here in a moment, please feel free to add those questions to Amanda's, and I will address them all sort of at once here, because some of them may be compare and contrast questions. So let me address all 3 options, and then I'll come back. So feel free to type those in to the chat bar, and I'll come back over in a minute. All right, so the last option, and probably the one that is the the last option, the keyboard and monitor arm combination, has some benefits in that it tends to be a less expensive option, but it has some limitations as well in terms of how you actually make all this work and what range of motion can you really achieve in a keyboard tray, for example. The one I've got pictured in the top right there, the Cobra keyboard arm, is one of the ones that carries the greatest variation from sitting to standing. It will come up higher than most, maybe not all. I haven't seen one that comes up much higher than that, but higher than most, so that it's going to get as close to elbow height as possible. But these are keyboard trays, have limitations. The arms can't possibly be as long as maybe you would like them to be in order to move to standing. So someone who is particularly tall is never going to fit very well on this kind of an option, right? So it does have some significant limits to its height range. You can see in both my example pictures that I just pulled from the internet there, is that just sort of as an example, the limited height range these are pretty adjustable keyboard or monitor arms, or the one on the right is a pretty adjustable monitor arm. The keyboards are pretty adjustable in terms of height, but without some extra equipment, it's really not possible to achieve true ergonomic setup. I would really like the keyboard to come up to elbow height. In both of these pictures, that's pretty good, but my guess is that these women are 5'6", 5'7", or less, maybe 5'8" on the outside. So anybody who's much taller than that is probably not going to be able to work on the keyboard in this position. And then the monitor height range is really tricky because monitors, arms in particular, have limitations as to how high they can go. Now you can mount them on the wall or do other things, but then they might have limitations on how short they can go. And so both of these pictures actually demonstrate poor ergonomic posture, essentially, when you talk about monitor positioning, because both of these women have to look down to see their screen. So it can be a nice option, especially if you have someone who has a short-term accommodation. If they can get a keyboard that is fully adjustable like this, it can be used when they're sitting as well as probably when they're standing. And if it's talking about a back injury and they need to be able to move more, then this might be a suitable option short term. But if this person intends to be able to sit and stand for a long period of time, it probably isn't going to work for them. So a very specific heights of people are a more appropriate, you have to think about that. A very specific heights of people makes sense for this, like probably myself is a good example, that I would probably be able to find a combo that works. But the vast majority of people taller than me are going to have some difficulty achieving true ergonomic setup with both of these. And obviously, only your monitor and your keyboard and mouse are going up and down, nothing else, right? So if you are someone who references paperwork a lot, if you have to take notes, if you're on the phone regularly, this setup really has some significant limitations. Is it easy to use? Sure. Is it less expensive? Yes, absolutely, because a keyboard tray and a monitor arm are definitely going to be less expensive than the other options. But you do have to also adjust two pieces independently. You have to raise your keyboard up, you have to raise your monitor up, which may also limit how frequently people actually use them. So there are some pros and cons to all of those options. And I do see some questions here popping in. So let's go back and look at those. Okay, so first question was, do you have any advice for the electric full desk models, motor life, weight limitations, frequency of use limitations, etc.? Yes and no, Amanda. That will definitely be connected. You'll have to do some review of the model specs. Certain products have different life expectancies, different lifespans, and are capable of different weights. Typically, what you end up with is different. The motor will dictate some of this. So how strong and how strong the motor is, how it adjusts, whether there is independent pieces for both legs, whether it's one for the whole desk. There's variations that you're going to want to do some research on to determine which is the best fit. But so yes, they're not all created equal. Weight limitation wise, you're probably not going to have too many issues. In most cases, your computer monitor, your keyboard, and like the elements of a computer aren't heavy enough to be of much concern for that. But yes, you are going to want to do some research to make sure that the style you're choosing is the best fit for the employee that you're giving it to, and is going to have the best life expectancy. All right, next question on my list was, sometimes the computer models dictate choice, which is totally true. Apple monitors are a great example, Mark. So Apple monitors restrict solutions, and they do. So there are certain products that are meant to be compatible with, like they've intentionally designed it to be compatible with an Apple product, so an Apple monitor, for example, and that is true of many different components. You also need to look at how they mount. So some of them have a standardized mount on the back. Some of your monitors may not. And so you definitely want to take a quick look and see and make sure that whatever product you choose is going to be supported. It will support the monitor that you're putting on it. That also goes for weight. So a lot of these products have two components. So so for example, all the Ergotron models, there is an HD and an LD option. And it's just based on monitor size. So they will tell you right in the specifications which size monitor this will fit, what range it will fit, and what weight it will fit. So depending on the type of monitor you have, some are heavier than others. And so the specifications, you'll want to review those and make sure the monitor you're choosing, the monitor you have, is going to work well with the product you're choosing, because there are two factors. Number one, if your monitor is too heavy, then it will likely, if it's too heavy for the model, then it will likely constantly creep. It might hold its position wherever you set it, but as time goes on, it will creep down because it's too heavy for the mechanism that's built into the actual model. And if it's too light, which is one I saw the other day, the monitor was too light for the arm, so it just popped up all the time. It never actually stayed where this individual wanted it. So it was a great in theory. It was at a multi-user workstation in a library. It was really great in theory because everybody uses the workstation. They could all quickly adjust it, but it didn't actually hold its position. Within 30 seconds, it had slowly slid itself back up to the top because the monitor was too light for the model of arm that had been selected. So you do want to take a quick look at that, and all of them should provide specs to tell you which monitor size, et cetera, is good. Question was, what's the price range for keyboard and monitor arm combos like the one I'm on right now? They both will be purchased independently, and it really does depend on what you choose. You could probably get a keyboard tray for less than $300, maybe less than $400, depending on what range of motion you need it to go through. And then your monitor arms are really going to vary depending on, again, models, how far you need it to reach, etc. But I think you could probably do a whole keyboard and monitor arm setup for $500, I would guess, maybe $600, sort of on the outside. So cheaper than your sit-stand desk add-ons, but you sacrifice a lot of range and perhaps long-term usability, so it might not be worthwhile to invest in this and look at a different option. All right, next question. Do you know if the height-adjustable desks from IKEA are good options? That's a great question. I actually don't know. I haven't looked at the IKEA ones. There is also my husband. I told you we bought one for him. He works on one that he bought at Costco, and so in terms of adjustability range, it's a bit limited. I have no idea what the IKEA adjustability ranges are. You'd have to take a quick look at that, and I don't know what their longevity is, linking back to Amanda's question earlier. That's something you're going to have to do some research in. I don't actually have a good answer for that one, so I apologize, Alexis. You're going to have to do a little research to figure out if it's a good fit or not. Will I address sit-stand stools? I wasn't going to, but I absolutely can, Belinda. So let me hold on to your question. I'll talk about that in 1 second. Next question was, are there any studies to show sit-stand options are healthy or better, improve productivity? No. Good question, Neil. So his question is, are there studies to show sit-stand options are healthy, better, improve productivity than just having the worker get up and move around, doing posture variation? Obviously, the negative to just moving is making behavior change to the worker. It's actually an interesting question because that's where we're going next, Neil. So the answer really is that no, really it doesn't matter if you, the point is to move. The point is to get posture variation. It doesn't matter how you achieve that. So my whole next section of this is how to achieve more posture variation without buying equipment. And so it can be really challenging. It is absolutely a behavior change, but you have to remember that using a sit-stand workstation is also a behavior change, right? That someone actually has to use the workstation. So just because you give them something that adjusts from sitting to standing does not mean that they are actually going to adjust between sitting and standing. There are a lot of people in this world who will sit all day just because they can, right? Because there's a chair there and that's what they do. So both require a behavior change, one perhaps more significant than the other, I will acknowledge that. But no, the studies are suggesting, and I'll present a couple here in a minute, but the studies are suggesting you need to, they call it, the most recent research is calling it non-sitting time. They're not even being as specific as saying movement. It's saying, okay, we sit for 8 hours a day, so our goal is to achieve a certain amount of non-sitting time per shift, for example, because since we're talking about work purposes. So that could be anything. It can be about standing to work. It can be about walking to the bathroom. It can be about going to a meeting. It can be about having a walking meeting, a standing meeting, taking the stairs instead of taking an elevator to create more activity. There are lots of ways to achieve this, and we're going to talk about a few of those in a minute. So no, there's nothing to support that you need to sit stand, that's the ideal. It's just one of those things that people do spend a lot of time at their computer. So this is one option to consider as a way to create more posture variation. Hopefully that answers that question. All right. Great question. Somebody else is asking, we have staff requesting sit stand. How would you go about determining if they're necessary and how would you explain it? Is it nice to have versus a need? Jody, I'm going to hold that question as well because that's coming up in the next few slides when I talk about some of our client strategies, because there are different ways of approaching this. And so I'm going to give you some answers to that question here momentarily. And Maddie's actually, Alexa's coming back to your question. She says she has an IKEA height adjustable desk. You have to adjust it from the legs so it's fixed. It's not actually an electric height adjustable desk. I don't know if they make an electric height adjustable desk. So it's not, her example is that it's not ideal for a sit stand because you adjust it basically when you set it up. It's like pins in the legs, and then you leave it at whatever height you've pre-selected. So, all right, great questions, everybody. I am going to come back to a couple of those here momentarily. Maybe I'll actually talk about the one right now. Okay, so let's do this part first. So costly, depending on the model, right? So thinking about sit-stand workstations, they can be an expensive one. No matter what model or option you choose, right? Going to a fully height adjustable desk, a desk add-on, etc. It can be costly depending on the model. And industry data, and this is not published yet, but we are getting some research coming out of some companies that have been using sit-stand workstations looking at usage, is that usage often dramatically drops off over time. So after 1 year, it's about 20% used it daily. So 20% of your staff that they gave sit-stand workstations to were using it after 1 year, and almost it dropped so significantly down to about 3% were using it every day after 3 years. And the actual ideal would be to use it every 30 to 60 minutes. So if they're not even using it daily, posture variation benefits are pretty limited at that point. So this is just some word of warning, right? That this is not true of everyone. There'll be people at these workplaces that use them constantly, and there'll be people that use them never, and probably never would have used them, right? So they're dragging down these averages. But there is a lot of, there is some new research suggesting that perhaps asking people to sit stand and giving them the tools and equipment without providing sort of the supports needed and the mechanisms in place for culture change to make this happen might actually be detrimental. You might not be achieving what you wanted to achieve in the first place, which is movement and the ability to sit and stand. So it really needs to sort of combine with a culture change. It can't just be dropping new equipment in there, because people's habit is to sit at the desk and they will continue to do so. All right, even if you provide them with new equipment. So you need to be mindful of that when you start to implement things here. And it may be accompanied by an increase in sedentary behavior outside of work as well, right? That people feel like they're more active while they're at work because they're using this sit-stand workstation. So they may actually not be as motivated to be active outside of work, which is not ideal either, right? Because we know we're sedentary, as we talked about at the beginning, we're sedentary at all kinds of different positions or different parts of our life, so it's important that we're active in every area. Sorry, Alexis, I just had another comment from one of our attendees. They said they had a staff member purchase an electric desk from IKEA, and the motor burnt out in about a month. It was in IT. They used it regularly, I think, and so it's something. So it sounds like perhaps the motor may not be sufficient enough for sort of full-time work use, part-time, like working at home occasionally, yes, but perhaps not for full-time use. I don't have any other specific examples. Okay, what about calendar options to make employees to get up and move as an option? Do you find this works, or employees don't like the interruption? So these are, there's been all kinds of different ones over the years. It started with stretching initiatives, so things like Stretching Sam was one of the examples earlier on. And Stretching Sam would pop up once every hour, let's say. I've forgotten how often it was. And he would take you through several little stretches to do at work. And pros and cons, there's actually all kinds of mixed reviews about them. In theory, yes, it gets people moving, makes people take a break, which is the other part, is that some people didn't actually do any of the stretches, but they may have taken that 30-second or minute break and stood up for a minute, which is a benefit, right? So there are potentially some benefits there, but imagine how you feel when you're in the middle of a big project, or you've got a deadline that you're working on, and this little person pops up, right? Or if you get a notification that pops up on your computer regularly, how many times do you just hit X and ignore it? Right, and so that's what they're finding in a lot of the research studies, that people would just ignore the little pop-up messages reminding them to stretch or get up. And some of the options would make you stretch, so they would actually, you couldn't get back into your computer or your program until after this little initiative was over. So the theory is that you would be more likely to actually do it because you couldn't escape from the program. But again, imagine how you would feel if you're in the middle of something that has a tight timeline or a deadline or whatnot, and this little guy pops up and you have to take a minute break. I would be pretty frustrated at that point. So there are some definite pros and cons. Yeah, so it's just something to think about. They're not all, again, culture-wise, it makes a difference. Some cultures handle this really well and some don't, so you need to think about whether it works or not. The research is really mixed about whether it's worked at different work sites that are out there. Do I know of any sit-stands that adjust or alert on to alert you to adjust them based on schedule or usage? Ian, that's an interesting question. It kind of reminds me of like your Apple Watches and the technology that's out there that tells you it's time to stand. And no, I don't know of any sit-stands that have actually taken that step that actually will tell you that it's time to sit or stand based on the last time that you used, that you were standing or sitting. I don't know of any that actually have that kind of technology built into them. I would imagine that it would be a very cool idea, but would likely also significantly increase the price point, which may not be of use or of benefit to a lot of folks. But I'm guessing that you're sort of describing more like the technology that's present in a lot of our like wearable activity bands, and those the concept's interesting. I don't know of any that are out there like that. Okay, so the message here is that sit-stand workstations are not essential for proper ergonomic setup or discomfort reduction, which is a question that Neil essentially asked earlier. Is this essential for proper ergonomic setup and discomfort reduction? The answer is no, right? That it can be. There are times that it is, yes, 100% essential because someone has a very specific injury or discomfort and they need this in order to, they literally can't sit. Like they've got such pain in their lower spine that the pressure of the seat on that specific area of their body is so excruciating they can't sit. That is a candidate for your sit-stand workstation, right? Those kinds of people are absolutely candidates. But there's a lot of folks that aren't necessarily going to be benefited by a sit-stand workstation, which sort of connects back to Jody's question about how do you go about determining if it's necessary or not. Sorry, I'm going to jump back here for a second. Ian, your question about the app, Amanda is saying that the Very Desk has an app that allows people to time their sit-stand. So there's an app that connects that you can use with the desk to make that happen. The desk doesn't do it itself, but the app will help you do it. So there you go. I didn't know that. Okay, so let's talk about how we get moving throughout the day without actually getting a sit and stand desk, because those are expensive and there are other options. So let's have a quick peek here. How do we reduce the risk in other ways? So the recommendations are that we should incorporate non-sitting time for a minimum of 2 hours per workday. Sounds like a lot, right? A quarter of your workday, for most of us, should be non-sitting time. So this is sort of coming out of some research that's been happening in the UK, right? They're sort of the leaders on this area. That this is a threshold to demonstrate the benefits of standing at work, that you want to achieve that 2 hours per day minimum, and then gradually increase to 4 hours a day. And I don't know about you, but that sounds like a lot of time sometimes, right? Finding 2 hours in your day to sit or stand can be really challenging, and finding 4 hours means half my day I'm standing. That's difficult. So this has to come with a culture shift. It's not as simple as just saying you need to stand more frequently. This is some examples of what 2 hours of non-sitting time might look like, right? I don't need to go into great detail, but the idea is that people actually do get breaks, right, throughout the day. Hopefully they take them, because that's one way that you get away from your desk and away from the sitting, right? But 30-minute breaks, let's say, maybe even an hour, if you get a 30-minute lunch and 2 15-minute breaks, you can probably find 30 to 45 minutes in break time that we are away from our desk. Most of us sit during that time, right? We go and have lunch and we sit at a table. We go to a coffee shop and we grab a cup of coffee and have a quick sit, right? So we do a lot of sitting during our break time, but if we can encourage our employees to actually use that time as an opportunity to alternate posture, then we're going to get away from that desk and away from our sitting time, which can be a nice way to build in, 30, 45 minutes in your day of actual standing time away from your desk without even changing your computer at all, right? Just don't sit when you go on your break. Go for a walk, stand, have your lunch at a standing table, right? Those kinds of things are great. right? Go for a walk on campus, in your office, wherever it happens to be, depending on where you work, right? So meetings, washrooms, take the stairs, etc. All of those create movement throughout your day. Think about times you can stand. So stand when you're taking phone calls, printing. Think about standing during meetings, right? Sometimes some workplaces really embrace this, the idea that there's almost like a standing height section that people can stand. That people can actually stand during a meeting or a conference call, and actually sometimes meeting rooms are designed to have some standing areas so that people can sit and stand sort of as they feel comfortable. I teach part-time at the college, and I have a lot of students who have various background, like physical health issues from accidents, etc. There's things that happen in the past, and there are a lot of students that need to be able to stand periodically. So they will warn me that periodically throughout the class they are likely to get up and stand at the back of the room just to vary their posture. And it's a great practice for everyone to do, right? That if you're going to be in something, in a meeting or for a couple hours, then it would be fabulous to be able to stand for a portion of that. Question is, UK research about incorporating 2 hours of standing, does it provide guidance to frequency of changing between sitting and standing? Good question. The general rule of thumb here is that we should be changing our posture every about 30 minutes to an hour. So 30 to 60 minutes you should be making that variation. Just you don't want to bulk it all up together. You don't want to have one, like 4 hours of standing and 4 hours of sitting. It doesn't give you variation, right? It's huge blocks of time. You want to vary it as often as you can. So the research supporting about every 30 to 60 minutes, you're actually rotating between the two. So other ways you can reduce the risk is to use your chair, right? You know, we forget about that your chair has a whole bunch of different adjustment options. Try and use those chair adjustments to actually adjust the chair. It will give, you change the angle of the backrest, for example, change the height of the seat or the angle of the seat, and all of a sudden you have a slightly varied posture, which is going to change the muscle loading, is going to change your blood flow, etc. Think about your tasks, right? So many of us bulk our tasks together to be as efficient as possible, right? So I spend 4 hours on the computer, then I go spend an hour doing filing, then I come back and I spend another couple hours on the computer, and then at my end of the day, the last thing I do before I go home is I go to the printer and I pick up all the things I printed throughout the day, bring them back, get them ready for the next morning, right? All of those things are not, are bulking it all together. Why don't we move more? We can do that by rotating our tasks, right? So spend 30 minutes of stretching or of filing in the morning, 30 minutes of filing after lunch, spend some time, break up your meetings, they're not all together, so you can use sort of meetings throughout the day as ways to move around, right? Take the stairs, take your breaks, drink lots of water, it makes you go pee, so you have to go to the bathroom more frequently, get you up from your desk, right? And think about, can you stand during telephone calls? Is that an option, right? Okay, so yeah, I have another comment here I'm going to read out. So it says, at this person's workplace, they have electric adjustable desks for all employees, and one of the reasons it was justified is that they needed more space, didn't have enough desks to assign to each person, so mobility was the choice. So most people don't have an assigned desk, and allowed more users in the same space with the ability for each person to fit the desk to them quickly, which is a great point. Depending on how your workflow and your workplace works, if you don't have assigned workstations, height adjustable desks absolutely make it so that most people will fit, and you can achieve ergonomic setup regardless of where you sit. So that's a great example of why a sit-stand desk can be a benefit outside of just injury prevention. All right, other ways you can look at things, again, culture change, right? So it is common to have meetings sitting down in a boardroom, but it doesn't have to be, right? Sometimes the most productive meetings are actually when you're walking, right? Then you're out generating that blood flow, your creativity is higher when you're moving, right? That movement actually helps us. And so standing meetings, walking meetings can be useful. It's not ideal to have a printer in your office. It's ideal to have a printer in a communal space. You actually have to get up and go to pick up your printing and pick it up every time you do it, not just wait till the end of the day and do it all at once. Actually go and talk to people. Don't just send them emails or call them, right? There's lots of different ways you can reduce the risk, and sitting and standing desk options are just one of them, right? So you can achieve the goals or the benefits of sitting and standing with some behavior change, but this takes a culture change to make that happen, right? To encourage and promote. All right, so I want to skip over that one and talk briefly about some different implementation strategies, which is what some of the questions were. So there is a time and a place where sit-stand is the ideal. If, for example, your employee can't sit because of discomfort, pre-existing injury, then that's probably a candidate for a sit-stand workstation. If your job is highly sedentary and you are truly chained to your desk, so some staff don't go anywhere all day, right? And they have no occasion to. There's no meetings in their schedule. There's no nothing. They sit down at the desk at 8 a.m. They leave at 4 p.m. And aside from taking their breaks, there is absolutely no other reason. They get 0 phone calls or very few. They rarely have to text colleagues. This is something that is worth doing a little evaluation. A lot of desk jobs are more variable than you think, but there are definitely some that require a high level of sedentary work. So you just want to be thoughtful about that. If it's highly sedentary, a sit-stand workstation might be an option. You want to think about employee motivation. Some employees are highly motivated to sit and stand, and some are not. So investing in a desk for someone who is not highly motivated is likely to mean that it's not going to get used. And so you've invested a lot of money in something that is not going to be actually beneficial to that employee or to the goal of your overall initiative. And you want to think about, does it fit with your corporate strategy and direction? Is this something that you are going to be encouraging people to do? How are you going to build this in so that there's an expectation that they are sitting and standing? There's discussion around it. There's education. There's a rollout plan. You need to think about how that works with your workplace, because it is important that you think about that. So I know I'm getting close to my 1 hour mark. I want to talk briefly about these client strategies. If you do need to check out to get to something else, I totally understand, and feel free. The recording will be available. But if you could hang with me for another 5 minutes, I'd like to talk to you briefly about what our clients are doing with some different things. So these are the most common sort of 3 ways. We have employees request a sit-stand workstation, which may or may not prompt a doctor's note, which may or may not prompt an ergonomic assessment. So a lot of our clients are struggling with the idea that your staff walks into your office and says, I need a sit-stand workstation, or I'd like a sit-stand workstation. What happens next, right? And so essentially a lot of employers have gone to the idea that, okay, we need a doctor's note because there is a significant financial cost to us, so we're not just going to implement this until we get some supporting documentation. But you and I know that a doctor will likely write that note, because there is no medical reason why it's not beneficial to sit and stand, right? It is beneficial. I've just spent half my webinar here describing why it is beneficial. So they're very likely to get a doctor's note saying that they need to sit and stand. So now our quandary hasn't really been solved, except that people who aren't very motivated probably don't make it to the doctor to ask for that note, right? So you get 10 people in your office, you tell them they need doctor's notes, 6 of them come back, and they all have doctor's notes. Okay. Now some of our clients have taken it one step further, because they're stuck here. Now they still have 6 out of 10 people, 60% of their staff walking in saying they need an office, a sit-stand desk, are coming back with that doctor's note, and they're thinking, well, okay, shoot, I still can't afford to buy 6 of these things this month and 6 next month, and do the math, it adds up fast. So a lot of clients some of our clients, not a lot, but some of our clients have moved to doing what I would say is an ergonomic assessment, right? So basically your employee request requires a doctor's note, and then once you get a doctor's note that supports that you need this, the next step is to have an ergonomic assessment by an external provider, typically us, because our clients, but yeah, an external ergonomic assessment that essentially evaluates whether you actually need a sit-stand workstation or not. And that is based on several factors. So going back to your question, Jody, it goes back to several factors. Number 1 is the work process, right? What do they do at their workstation? And then just as importantly, how much time do they spend away from their workstation? I had a lady who I had a doctor's note for that she was adamant she needed a workstation, and by the time I talked to her, I thought, you already only are at your workstation for maybe 50% of your day, maybe on a good day, 50%, or on a bad day, I guess you could think about it. So at least 50 to 60% of your day, you are already up and in other locations. So let's talk about how to make those opportunities more active and not worry so much about the intermittent times you're here at your computer. Let's make sure this is set up well for sitting time, but let's use this as your sitting time, and let's use the other time as your standing and moving time as best as we can. And chances are good you're actually going to get no additional benefit from standing at your computer workstation, because we're only going to add maybe half an hour to an hour of standing to your day by getting you to stand here. We can do that better in other ways, right? So the ergonomic assessment evaluated essentially whether it was essential or not that she achieved the sitting and standing element. So is it nice to have? Yes, always nice to have. Is it a need? not for everyone. I would say that out of the number of assessments I do asking if somebody needs a sit-stand or not, and they often have a doctor's note, I probably only recommend a sit-stand 60 to 70% of the time. Right? By the time I talk to the employee and get a better grasp of what they do, how they do it, get them set up better at their computer workstation, make sure their chair actually fits them, because if it doesn't, there's no wonder they're not comfortable when they're sitting, right? So by the time we make all those adjustments, there isn't always justification for adding a sit-stand workstation, and we explain that as part of the process, right? The goal, you know, if I add sit-stand, I'm only going to add a small percentage of time to your day, and that's not really an ideal option. So that's sort of the process. The key thing to remember here is that you're going to want to have a strategy in place from your very first request. This is a hard thing to rein back in once it gets going, right? So it's a very slippery slope once you start implementing sit-stand options for some people. How do you stop when the next person comes in the door and the next person comes in the door? And just like a brand new chair at somebody's workstation, I guarantee you sit-stand is that kind of thing. People see it, think it's cool, want one. And so you're going to have a little flurry of requests after you implement your first one. So I would say that once you start getting those requests, I would spend some time figuring out what your policy and your strategy is going to be moving forward, and put that very first person through that exact same process. And we can help you with that. So if you've been struggling to figure out what you're doing, or you're trying to figure out how to actually create a strategy, what's the plan, let me know, and I can help you sort of share what some of our clients have been doing. But you do want to have some sort of structure to how this request goes so that everyone gets the same approach. Some clients have taken a totally different approach. Said, okay, we can't afford to put these in everywhere, so instead of doing that, I'm not going to give them to individual people. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set up 2 fully, or 5, or whatever number you choose, but set up a few fully adjustable sit-stand workstations, and they're going to be shared workstations. So everybody gets, they're highly adjustable. They need to fit a lot of people, a large range of people, to make sure it works for everyone. And then basically your staff can go online as if they're booking a meeting room and book a sit-stand workstation for an hour. So they can actually go, drop their laptop in there, or access, it's connected to the corporate, the corporate shared server, and so they can go in there and access the programs and the files and stuff they need, or drop their laptop on a docking station, and then they can use the standing workstation for an hour, or maybe 2 per day, depending on how many employees you have in your office, right? But some of our clients are going this route, which I think is a really interesting option, right? It cuts down your costs. You can really invest in some really high quality sit-stand options, because you're only going to buy 2, 3, 4, 5, right? You're not buying 50. And then essentially you'll go through and everybody will get to sign up for a period of time. And so your highly motivated individuals will get the benefits because they will use it. They're highly motivated. And your less motivated individuals, or not motivated individuals, you won't have spent the money on something that they're not going to use either. So it's kind of an interesting option. There are obviously some drawbacks here, is that perhaps not everyone perhaps not everyone would be motivated enough to actually go use it. So you're sort of in the middle. People may use it if it was at their desk, but wouldn't go and sign up, which is possible. So it's something to think about. Michelle just said some sit-stand providers will loan options to potential clients to test, which is totally true. And there are some that you can even, if you have certain numbers of employees, can probably get one for free to try out. But loans and trials are all obviously short-term things. Even if we get one for free for a while, chances are good it's going to be it's only one, right? So you still start yourself down this slippery slope of potentially some concern. How do you rein it back in? Who do you give it to? Right? Those are questions. So I like this option as sort of this sign up station. It just gives you an interesting choice or selection. It can pair really nicely with a wellness initiative as well. So we had a client that was rolling out sit-stand workstations, a few shared workstations. They intended to implement them at a few workstations, actually employees, but they wanted to figure out which employees they should give them to. So they started with the shared workstations, and then they were going to work towards actually implementing them at buying 5 of them, let's say, to give to specific people. And so, but that was all going to be based on usage and type of work that person performs, etc. But the usage component was determined here. So how often did they sign up? How often did they actually use the sit-stand workstation? Your high users were good candidates for getting one at their desk. And then obviously people who never used it were not good candidates. So they got a pretty clear picture as to who was going to be benefited from this and who wasn't. So I think I said sort of a bit a bit earlier, but be proactive. Have a formal implementation strategy. If you have decided that this is the direction you're going, and some of our clients do, you want to make sure that you are evaluating how you're going to roll it out. Who's going to get it first? You know, if you have 100 employees, you may not be able to afford to buy them all at the same time. Who gets them first and why, and have some sort of strategy. It's not arbitrary. It's all decided based on type of work that they perform. It might be decided based on like your CEOs or CFOs or directors and administrators, or your frontline staff, get them first. You have to make those kind of decisions, but roll it out in a really structured way and be totally transparent about the full rollout plan, including timelines. Right? People are going to want these things. They're going to be popular for a lot of folks. You want to make sure you have a full plan in place as to how you're actually going to implement them if you are going to go fully across the board sit stand. It takes some thinking and some execution to make it happen right. All right, so while I've got you, hopefully most of you still online with me, I apologize I'm running a little late today. I just wanted to let you know that so I told you at the beginning that we had a special offer on today's webinar. We are hosting an industrial ergonomic conference, like I mentioned, in June. And so for every webinar from now until June, we're going to give away a free registration. So if you are in industry in any kind, so if you are in a production facility, manufacturing, pharmaceutical, any kind of environment like that, you will likely be benefited by some of the topics and things that are in this going to happen at this event. So I will make sure that I will send an email here momentarily, and anyone who is interested in being entered into the draw, just hit reply, and that will give you one entry into the draw, and we'll draw for a free registration at every webinar from now until June. So make sure you join us for some upcoming webinars, and we will make sure that we get your name on the list, and hopefully you are one of the lucky winners. So thanks for joining me today. I know I have a couple questions that I still need to answer, which I'm going to do now. But if you do need to get out to another meeting and things, again, I understand, so please feel free to sign off. And hopefully we'll see you at the upcoming webinars this month, or the next few months leading up to this event. All right, Belinda, your question was about sit-stand workstation, sit-stand stool. It's a good question. Sit-stand stools are an interesting combination with sitting and standing workstations. So most often a sit-stand stool is something you would use with a standing workstation that is, it can be there's different ways. It can be a saddle stool, it can be sort of a perching stool, there's different options. But essentially the idea is that you are not sitting at 90-degree hip position. You're perched on the edge of a chair, which is more like at your natural hip height, so it's just slightly below that. So you perch on the edge of it, it gives you a slight flex in your knees, but your feet are still on the floor, you are still in a partial standing position. It can be a really great way to, again, vary posture. So you go from, it almost gives you three options, right? You can go from sitting, which is fully seated in a chair, to standing, obviously no chair involved at all. And then this third hybrid option would be to actually be on a sit-stand stool, right, which gives you sort of a partial sort of seated position. So you take some pressure off your feet, right, you change your hip posture, you change the muscle loading to your lower body, and it can be a really great way to add sort of a third postural variation to a workstation that already adjusts, right? So if your workstation goes between sitting and standing, a sit-stand stool, although an extra cost to add into the mix here, would give you the third option for variation in posture while you're still at your computer. So it can be a really great benefit if you can add that into the mix, especially if you already have one present. And there are tons of them out there. You just have to figure out which one works best. So some of them have casters, some of them don't, some of them are saddle seats, some of them are just angled stools. Yeah, there's all kinds of different options there. Hollands, would you mind sharing the resource for the UK research on the 2 hours moving towards 4 hours standing? I would love to, but for some reason, usually my laptop runs my notes, and my main screen runs my presentation. And today, my laptop did not come up with my notes, so I don't actually have the reference available. It is in the bottom in my notes section. So what I will do is when I send the email saying this is the webinar link is available, I will include the link there because it is in my notes. I just can't see them right now. For some reason, my laptop didn't turn on properly. So yeah, so I can totally share that with you. And Maddie, is there research to suggest standing desks increase upper extremity accessory Muscle activation, upper traps and neck. That's a good question. I actually don't know the answer to that. I don't think so. My instinct is that I would not think so, primarily because you don't really change much upper body posture from sitting to standing. So as long as you sit properly in your chair, for example, you don't even need armrests. So if you didn't have armrests on your chair already, your upper body in terms of sitting and standing posture would really change minimally, with the exception of maybe some lower back postures as you stand versus sit. But yeah, that's a good question. I actually don't know the answer 100%. So it's definitely something that would be worth a little investigation into. My instinct is that it wouldn't have a significant difference, but perhaps it does. So if you find anything, I would love for you to share back with me. That'd be great. Okay, everyone. So I am just going to end the webinar now. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to shoot me an email. And please, I hope you enter into our draw for the Industrial Ergonomic Conference if that's relevant to you. We're really excited to get started on this event, and we'd love to give away our first registration. So yeah, hopefully you can join us in Toronto in June. Thanks, and have a great day, everybody.